I want to thank both Anne and Camille for that phenomenal introduction. I really don't feel worthy of one of those introductions, but two of them is quite something. I'm only going to talk for a few moments about something that I know you all recognize, and then we'll get into a conversation. But I first have to say that I have really three mentors in the room, a fourth via video, but three in the room. First, my first policy job ever was working for Delane Easton, who's right over here. And I have to say, I've had the great pleasure of working for many women who are really fighters for families and children. And the first was Delane Easton. There is no one that I learned so much about being passionate, about caring, about getting your facts straight when you're arguing. But the most important lesson I learned from Delane is really thinking through every day how much we do in Sacramento, or we do as policymakers, how much it affects a child. You know, we think a lot about broad numbers and budgets, and what I'm really most thrilled about being in this room with all of you is that really you have the care of our future in your hands. So it's my great privilege to be here because you all are folks who are ensuring that our greatest resource, I know it sounds almost like a cliche, but our greatest resource, our people will grow to be tremendous citizens because of the care you give them, or the services you provide them, or the time and sweat you give every night to them. And I learned that first from Delane, but I also learned from Camille, who also just embodies so much of the heart of caring about policy. She is a person who lives it and breathes it in everything she does, and I learned a lot about being really committed from her. And Ann O'Leary, who took my job at the White House, working for Hillary, she has been working on these issues alongside me and others for so long. And we have made a lot of progress, in part because of Anne's leadership, in part because of the commitment she's shown, not only here in California, but across the country. And when you think about just the remarkable progress over the last few years from Too Small to Fail and the Center for the Next Generation, it is a tribute to her vision and leadership, and how much we can change, not only in policy from Sacramento and Washington, but how much we can do in the culture to change how communities and families feel about these issues. So I want to thank all of you. Really, I have one broad message today. I'm going to talk a lot about what's happening in Washington and the progress we're making there, how much more we have to do. But I'm going to talk a lot about why these issues are so important. I work at a think tank. I lead a think tank in Washington that works on domestic policy, national security, economic policy. And a few years ago, we decided to make universal pre-K and early learning, childcare, really centerpieces of our agenda. And I'm proud to say that we put forward a series of ideas, and President Obama, in his State of the Union a few years ago, adopted many of our ideas and put forward his own vision of universal pre-K, and just recently in the State of the Union talked about expanding childcare. Now, why would we create, yes, let's applaud that. Because I should say, having working in policy in Washington, I know that happens not because of think tanks alone or senators. It happens because of the grassroots. It happens because families recognize these issues, and it happens because of people in this room making clear that policymakers understand it. So thank you all for the work you've been doing. Why do we focus, why is the president so focused on these issues? And I really say that they intersect three important, really vital challenges. First, getting our kids ready to learn, making sure our K through 12 system works, making sure our Schools are working. What have we learned over the last several years? An investment in 0 to 5 makes sure that kids come to school ready to learn. As we go through our national debates on reforming education, authorization of ESEA, or the way we fund education at the national level, there will be a bigger and bigger focus on early learning because people precisely understand this connection between making sure kids start off the race ready or start off their race already falling behind. And really, if we believe in opportunity for everyone, we have to ensure that kids are ready when they get there, when they get to school. And that's why these issues are so vitally important. We've learned that the early years of a child's cognitive and emotional development establish their direction in life. 85% of brain development occurs before age 5. Yet per capita public spending on children under 5 is less than 15% what we spend on K through 12. Now, that is a big challenge for us. That is a big, big challenge for us. But I think there's more and more recognition that we have to address these challenges, not only for today, but for our future. Because if we allow this skills gap, the fact that so many kids are coming to school already falling behind, if we allow this to continue, our economy will not grow as we hope it would. This year, the majority of children in public schools are children of color. I don't have to tell people that in California. It's been true here for a while. A disproportionate number have faced the challenge of poverty, and access to high-quality preschool could help equalize the educational challenges they face. Most importantly, if we close the achievement gap for children, native-born white children, the achievement gap between native-born white children and Black and Hispanic children in the U.S. economy will grow by an additional $2.3 trillion in 2050. So it's really in all of our interests to ensure that we're investing in the early years to make sure that we close that achievement gap. And that's a critical argument for all of us. But it's not just getting our kids ready to learn and getting them ready for school. It's also ensuring that we're addressing the challenges families face. Today, as we all know, most families have 2 parents working, and yet our systems of support are kind of upside down for those families. Higher income families have access to leave programs, can afford childcare. Lower income families, childcare is eating out the base of their income. Women are struggling to afford essential things like childcare as they go back to work, and it's a huge drain for them. We did a report this year on really the middle class squeeze and the way families are really hurting in today's economy. Wages are stagnant for most middle class families. Lots of costs have gone up. The number one cost that has gone up, highest cost, higher than healthcare costs over the last decade, higher than higher education costs over the last decade, higher than retirement costs, is childcare. Think about that. Think about the fact that it's just increasingly out of reach, and parents have to make the most daunting choices about what kind of childcare they're going to place their children in. Lower quality childcare because they simply can't afford the quality. You know, if we believe in policies that balance work and family, if we actually believe in policies that value families, and I think over the next couple of years you might hear a lot of rhetoric about valuing families, particularly from Washington. My view is the best way to do that is to demonstrate that you care about those children and their parents, and that's by investing in childcare. But finally, there's another reason we should really care about these issues and why everything you do is so vitally important. It's because if we care about long-term inequality in the country, if we care about ensuring that we're reducing it, that we can actually ensure that children today have the same opportunities as their parents, there is no better investment we can make. There's no actual issue across the spectrum. We know the return on investment is higher, that it makes the most sense, that we actually get money back as a society for every dollar we invest in it. It's a no-brainer. frankly, if you care about these issues. And the secretary enunciated a lot of these issues. The fact that so many kids fall behind just in the word gap. Think about that. They're just not getting as many words because they don't have parents. They have parents who are really stressed out, who are working 2 jobs. I don't have to tell people in this room. Parents working 2 jobs. When you have a parent working 2 jobs, how often, how much can you talk to your child? I have 1 job. I find it hard sometimes to talk through the issues, answer every question. So that's why we have to make these investments, because we want to make sure that this basic premise, this thing we talk about as the heart of the American dream, as the California dream, ensuring that every kid has a chance. All we're advocating for with these child care investments, with early learning investments, with universal pre-K, we're just advocating for this basic notion that that child starts off the race equal to everybody else. And how he or she advances will be up to him or her. But we don't want to have a system where that child is already falling behind at such a young age. And so I really want to thank you all for the work you do. There are very few issues in Washington that we can work on that are a win-win-win. Usually it's a win and a little bit of a loss, but this is a win-win-win. And that's why the work you do is so vitally important, and why I'm really honored to be here. And to honestly say that, I know that it's hard sometimes trying to make policy change. It's harder in Washington, I can assure you, than in Sacramento, but it is hard making policy change. But we have seen some successes. There are increases in pre-K funding and early learning funding, even in this difficult time in Washington. We do have a president who is talking about expanding child care, putting it in his budget, very large expansions of child care. So I really want to applaud you for the work that you've been doing to help build that argument, build that case, because this really is a no-brainer at this time. And we just have to simply make the argument over and over again that the promise of the American dream, the promise of the California dream, is that those kids have a fighting chance. And they have so many fantastic advocates in this room. You have to just keep working on it. But I know there were moments there where health care for everybody didn't seem so easy. There are definitely moments where I thought the hill was just too high. But we made it there. And in so many ways, this case is even clearer. So thank you all very much. I look forward to the conversation, and I look forward to your questions.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is going to be really tough, right? Like you're just going to hit me with hard things.
That's it. But Anne's going to
I'm
start.
going to hit you first. So thank you, Neera, so much. I think one of the things that's terrific about having you come out here is that often there is a real synergy between what's happening at the national level and what's happening in California. Even the First Five Commission, I remember the stories of Rob Reiner talking about going to the White House Conference on Early Learning that First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton did in 1997, and being so inspired by that and coming back and doing the work that he did that it made what is happening here. And I see that happening again, this national momentum and hard work happening in the states. But there's also a little bit of a juxtaposition, which is that there's huge national momentum and people are excited and there's work on universal preschool, and we're doing that here in California. And yet on childcare, we're still struggling, frankly, to get back the cuts that were made. What can you give us for advice from your perspective from the national level? How do we ride the momentum? How do we take advantage of the work that CAP is doing around the middle class squeeze and making the arguments about childcare? What advice can you give us as the biggest advocates on this issue of childcare? How can we ride this national momentum to get more done here in California?
That's a great question, and I do want to acknowledge that California has really led the way and has helped shape the national debate, not only in the 1990s, but over the last decade. And it's always our hope that you will lead the way even more with more support in the years to come. I think one of the big challenges we see on pre-K or universal pre-K versus childcare, and I'm a person who agrees with you that it shouldn't be versus, it should be both, is that I think we have some work to do to build the business case argument for childcare, like we have built the business case argument for universal pre-K. In Washington in particular, you'll hear business leaders talk about universal pre-K because they see it as an extension of K through 12, and they see it as an extension of their advocacy around education. So part of the work we're trying to do is build that argument further down. In fact, as we all know in this room, it's really in those first years that children are developing so quickly, and so having a very poor quality childcare and then moving to high quality pre-K doesn't really make sense from an investment perspective. If you want to get bang for your buck, you should be investing in all those periods. But I think we do have to work more assiduously with some of our business leader friends to see childcare not as a soft issue, but a hard human capital issue, like so many of them have recognized universal pre-K as a human capital issue.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on that, part of what we see is that as we develop a workforce to provide that quality care for infants and toddlers and in preschool, a living wage for those people is also part of that conundrum. And so in your work and in your conversations, is that part of the conversation when we talk about increasing the quality in the investment and increasing the quality? It can't just be access, in my view.
Yeah,
has
absolutely.
to be both access and paying people for the good job that they will do.
Yes, no, I mean, and there is definitely increasing awareness that to make sure the experience is a quality experience, you need to have high skills. Again, I think people need to reformulate the way they think of these things. Too often people, think of this as just an extension of kind of caregiving people do out of the home, and so don't value it in the same way. And that's why I think, kind of taking the idea of getting kids ready to learn and moving it on down, so people think of this more as a learning experience, not just a care experience for children, is helpful to the national debate. But I also think, these issues really intertwine with a whole host of challenges. Caregiving writ large, whether it's for children or for elderly parents, is not, we don't have the level of investment. But we should really recognize that part of the reason why there's so little money and resources is because in our country these issues have been completely privatized, in the sense that we just think it's really the family's burden to take care of a parent or take care of a child. Whereas if you go to other countries, there's universal child care that's publicly available, because we don't just leave it to the family to pay for it. Because when you leave it to the family to pay for it, except for little subsidies here and there, you essentially have a system in which people are very squeezed and they have minimal resources, so they're trying to squeeze down those resources. So over the long term, I hope that we can think of these issues as human capital issues, just like they think of them in other countries, that this is about training the next generation to be your workers, your engineers, your leaders, making sure that we recognize that connection between early learning and K through 12, so that we can have more substantial support. That's the way I think over the long term we're going to get the dollars we need to make sure that we have the quality we need, so that we're not paying people minimum wage to do a job that is really about entrusting our future, right? We shouldn't be basically saying, out of the goodness of your heart, you should do this job, right? Because you like it and the kids are cute. So it's okay that we pay you really not a livable wage to do it. I mean, that is what we say today. And we don't say that to other really vital things our country does. Like, if you have to build our bridges or build our cars or build our airplanes or fly them, we don't want you to be paid. We don't want you to be paid like less than a livable wage. So why we do that around our children is something that strikes me as very odd.
So one of the things that I appreciate about Neera is that she's both good at the policy, but also the politics of really kind of mapping out, as she's doing now, the framing of how we talk about this and how we think about it. And I'm curious, Neera, to just dig into this a little bit. I was recently at a panel, and Nicholas Kristof said that he was worried that if Hillary Rodham Clinton ran for president, that it would make early childhood a partisan issue. Now, I hope that's, well, I'm not going to say what I hope on all that, but what I do hope is that early childhood doesn't become a partisan issue. And I'd love to hear your viewpoints. You're now in Washington with a Republican-controlled Congress. And it's fascinating to watch this. You know, you look at around the country where Republican governors, I was just counting, 7 Republican governors made preschool or early childhood part of their state of the states. Yet you go into Washington and you barely can get anyone to admit that this is a positive thing. So I'd like for you to say a little bit about how are we going to make progress on this in a Republican Congress? What does this look like as the presidential politics start? And you have somebody like Jeb Bush, who frankly did make universal preschool a priority in Florida. How do we make sure that this is lifted up, and what is your advice and thoughts on it?
I think that it's always hard for me to talk about Washington in places that have functional states or something like that, because it's a unique place. It's almost like an out-of-body experience. But I will try to explain how it is that you can have Democratic governors, but as Anne's saying, Republican governors pass legislation in their states, lead on these issues, and then their own senators go to Washington and never talk about the issue, and then provide, I think, a little bit of hope. So I should acknowledge that even with a Republican House and that was relatively intransigent, we have gotten substantial increases in the panoply of early learning funding because of the fantastic leadership of Patty Murray and many others. But she was the lead negotiator in the Senate, a woman senator in leadership, negotiating the budget, and she fought tooth and nail for this. So it does matter. But the challenge we've had in Washington on issues like early learning and pre-K is that, in the 90s when Anne and I worked close together on education and other issues, there was a question about how to spend money or the amount you would spend on something. Over the last couple of years with the rise of the Tea Party, there's now a question about whether we'll spend money on certain things. And when you're debating whether you're going to have a Department of Education, it's a little bit hard to move to expanding universal pre-K. So we've had a dynamic over the last couple of years, in part because of the rise of Republican primaries and the rise of the Tea Party, where people who've advocated for universal pre-K just a few years ago come to Washington and can't advocate for it in Washington. Now, the thing I'm actually slightly hopeful about is that now Republicans have both the House and the Senate, which, I personally wasn't super anxious about, but a hopeful sign about that is that they now have to govern. And they have to make decisions themselves instead of just blaming the Senate blaming the House. And you do see some hopeful signs. Lamar Alexander, who's now chair of the HUP committee, the committee that looks over education and healthcare, has made positive sounds about expanding early learning. Now, he would do it in a way that I don't really support, and block granting it, et cetera, but at least there's a conversation happening about investing in early learning, not whether to just completely disinvest. Now, I would say another hopeful sign in the national debate is you actually do have Republicans now talking about rising inequality and the lack of social mobility. Now, I wasn't born yesterday, so I remember all of their policies that were in a slightly different direction, but I'm for champions whenever you can take them. And if you actually care, and I think it's really up to all of us to say, if you actually care about rising inequality or the challenge of social mobility, then there's something you can do about it. You can actually invest in early learning. It's pretty, and you have a lot of Republican governors who've done it. So I think it's really up to us to make that rhetoric real, and I think we have real opportunities with that if it's not more than a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks that we hear Republican candidates talk about these issues. Now, I would say that both Anna and I worked for a person who is considering running for president, so I'm a little biased on this. But, truthfully, I worked for Hillary when she was running for president. I was her policy director then. And back in that race, she had a proposal that would provide paid leave across the country. She supported sick days legislation, has supported universal pre-K as one of her first issues. So I believe that we will have a national conversation on these issues. I think it will only be polarized if people choose to make it polarized. And I don't see anyone on the progressive side doing that, so I hope it won't happen.
So one of the other, in talking about across the aisle, in the work that we do, sometimes our across the aisle is how we take this continuum past early ed and partner with our folks in K-12, and how we actually move across that continuum and across that divide that seems to exist. Here in California, with our local funding formula, we're talking for the first time about having opportunities to include early education in that. How do you see, with Senator Alexander's ESEA reauthorization effort, what does that mean for early childhood in the future?
So, the whole conversation about reauthorization of ESEA, which is really just the way the federal government spends its education dollars and the infrastructure around that, and we have on the stage a person who knows much more about it than I do. But that debate is that conversation will be a really interesting conversation because Senator Alexander is talking about expanding our early learning, but then doing it in the form of a block grant, which would really limit what we could, or eliminate what we could really do around quality. I have to say, one of the most hopeful signs is both the White House and Democrats are very much united about having an investment in early learning as part of the debate around ESA, really driving this connection together, which is a really important, I think, conversation to have. When things like that happen, if you want to pass a bill, that means there should be some real opportunity here. And I think the big question is whether Senator Alexander wants to pass a bill in which he will need Democratic votes, or whether he is interested in just sort of passing something with Republican votes that passes the House, and then we won't get a bill. So I'm hopeful if we want to actually move a bill forward in the Senate, which I think there are a lot of signs of you can actually make this connection really strongly. And I hope that if we do so at the federal level, we can leverage, with whatever dollars are brought to bear there, greater and greater activity in the states, which would hopefully reward the work that you're doing here in California.
Great.
Let me ask another question, then we probably want to wrap, so I don't know what time it is. So I'm curious, there's a movement going on in Washington, Neera, that I know you've been part of this conversation about evidence-based policymaking. Ron Haskin from the Brookings Institution has been really focused on it. And the focus on an issue that many, many people in this room work on, which is the issue of home visiting. So as you probably know, many of our local First Fives are investing in home visiting programs, or California is on the forefront of working on this. And I think there's a couple of questions there that I'm curious about, which is the general notion of how do you scale up evidence-based programs. So even though we've made tremendous progress on home visiting, we still are reaching far too few families. And I think it's a question of like, how do we think about moving this forward? I would love to know your thoughts, but also your thought of like, what is your general take on the notion of evidence-based policymaking? What does that do in terms of ideas that don't yet have evidence? How do we make sure that the good ideas continue to get spurred and tested out?
So I have to say, I always think the conversation about evidence-based policymaking is a little odd because I'm always like, what were they doing before? I mean, were we just like randomly throwing money at a table or something? I mean, we generally have, you build evidence as you go, demonstration program to something that gets a lot of research over the long term. I think that's the kind of model that we have to develop for funding, which is that we have the freedom to innovate in certain ways, so you have demonstration models or broader programs that you can scale up. I think the challenge we have in Washington, and it relates a little bit to the polarization in Washington, is that debates about what we do have become so polarized that everyone is sort of scraping to protect what we've done rather than be able to have the freedom to innovate in new areas. And so that is a real challenge as we're trying to think through. We have changing communities. The country's changing, technology is changing. How do we innovate at a time where resources are very limited? And on top of that, just to be honest, policymakers, people in service delivery in Washington are loath to innovate because innovation often means failure, and we don't really give people a lot of room to fail in Washington these days because every time you fail, it's a Washington Post story. So I think for us, we're always trying to think through how do we create demonstration programs or innovation funds or models in which you allow people who are dealing with very diverse communities, for example, who are dealing with interesting connections between early learning and taking care, long-term care. I mean, there are connections between college and early learning. There are areas in which you want to foster innovation, but in a world of scarce resources, how do you do that innovation at a time where you don't have the evidence and you don't have, you're really defending programs and honestly slots. I mean, we're defending, we've gone through a period the last couple of years where, children in Head Start have lost slots. Families have been forced to pull their children out of Head Start because of the decisions that have been made at the federal level. And so in that arena, it makes sense for, policymakers are often thinking like, let's just defend what we have instead of creating new models. And I think that is a challenge. My hope, the president has shifted away from a focus on deficit reduction towards investment. I hope that will be something that lives more than 3 months and it is shaped in a presidential debate and conversation, so we can get back to a place where we have the ability to think beyond next week or next month into how do we change these programs to make them serve communities over the coming years.
So apparently we have time for one more question. And so.
Ann knows better if she's running for president.
Oh, there you go.
That's usually my first question.
There. Well, so I'm curious about that. Not about that.
I'm actually not soliciting the question. So,
No, but to say, probably one of the things that we hear is, and I think at the state level as well as the national level is the disappointment sometimes in the people that we have representing us. Are you hopeful about people out there that are coming up and are You know, are we going to find them, or do you want people to raise their hand here? That you can-
Well, I actually do want to say, you know, like people get cynical, but we really need good people to run for office. And everyone in this room is a leader. So I hope you will think about public office leadership, not just leadership in your communities, as you think through your, you know, what you're doing in your communities. Like that's a really important thing too. So I'll take a little bit from my healthcare experience, which I just got over my PTSD last week on that. So, but you know, that was a challenging legislative process. But the truth is that most people in Congress, the president, you know, they were really struggling with how to do the right thing. And you know, I know that people that like television shows are really entertaining, and I might watch Scandal on occasion too. But you know, the truth is, like, Washington is definitely a place made up of people with foibles. But the truth is the vast majority of people are really trying to think through, under some very tough circumstances, how to make their communities better. And, you know, I take the example of the expansions we've had in early learning. That really happened over the last year. We had a kind of big budget win that no one really expected, because that is really, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars in early learning dollars, simply because, like, Patty Murray just day in and day out argued with Paul Ryan, which, let me tell you, is no fun to do, about how this was really important. And, you know, again, I think it's easy with the headlines and with, you know, the general culture, and, you know, it's much easier to focus on a stupid thing somebody does or a Cornhusker kickback in healthcare than to think through how this piece of legislation is going to actually ensure that 14 million people have healthcare today that wouldn't have it otherwise. But that's what a lot of people are trying to do. And the challenge is, the polarization between the parties today is because the parties are farther apart on what the government should do, not because somebody's a jerk and somebody's like just a sellout. And so I think that's what makes the conversation difficult. So for me, like I've made a bunch of jokes about how Washington is dysfunctional, but when it works, when you actually see the difference it makes in people's lives, there's no greater force for good, honestly. And so, you know, I hope people kind of ignore the Twitter chatter and social media and so much of what's on our television, and think through that these are really vital decisions that will be made one way or the other, and that's better that we have good people making them. And if you've actually done a diaper, probably be better at Washington jobs than other people. So I hope people will think about that joke took a while, actually. But I hope people, especially in this room, will think through how important it is to serve.
Can I say just one thing to close on Neera, which is something I've really learned over the years, is that Neera doesn't get weighed down by the cynicism. And I say that very seriously because last year she called me up and one of her staff called and said, you know, we're gonna really work, we're gonna make a real big play for universal pre-K and for guaranteeing childcare for everybody. And I said, you're nuts, like, are you crazy, really? And the fact of the matter is that they did it. I mean, they did the hard work, they wrote the hard ideas, the White House listened. And so I think I really took two things from that, which is like, you know, don't be cynical, don't let it get you down. And two, just do the really hard work, because if you're not gonna do it, somebody else will, and they'll be on the other side. And so I think just remembering that, you know, if you've given the opportunity and Hillary Clinton's asking your opinion, well then yeah, it actually is a good idea to stay up until 2 o'clock in the morning and write that policy memo, because you really might make an impact.
Not that ever happened to either one of us.
To anybody that we know. But I just want to really thank Camille for inviting Neera, but also really thank Neera for the amazing work she does leading in Washington as one of the, I think one of the few women head of I probably have the largest think tank in Washington. There's women are changing the ways, not only in Congress, but also because of people like Neera.
And let me just say again, thank you, and thank you to Camille and Anne, Elaine again. But these two advocates have been, I mean, our kids are better off for them. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Neera.